I am very happy to introduce our next speaker, Professor Barry Rogers. He's a visiting professor of practice at the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Science at the London School of Economics. And his talk is called Shaping the Energy Transition, Exploring the Behavioral Underbelly of Transformational Deal-Making in a Global Energy Firm. Thank you so much, Professor Rogers, for joining us, and please feel free to share your screen.
Paulius, thank you very much. So let me just, hello everybody, and thank you, Paulius, and thank you, Yitzhak and Bjorn. I'm struck by the connections. We come from very different perspectives, we come from very different backgrounds, but even in the conversations we've had this afternoon, Bjorn, I remember back in 1996, sitting, listening to Tony Giddens and Jürgen Habermas, and it almost changing my life. And Yitzhak, if you've got a second, I will show something that's a part of my research, which really plays to what Sabi mentioned a few moments ago about hyperarousal, and particularly hyperarousal in an organizational setting, and some of the impact it has on people's commitments to do. Okay, can you see my screen? Let me see.
Yes.
Go to full screen. Yeah, is that okay? Good. That is, this is going to be a bit of a change in terms of what we've heard from the previous two speakers, as befits the nature of the place. And I thank you to Sadi, thank you to Paulius, thank you to everyone who's made me very welcome over the last few days. If the next few, I guess the next few weeks are going to be anything like the last few days I've had in terms of some of the connections, some of the links I've made in terms of being able to speak with colleagues, I'm really looking forward to it. The title of what I want to do while I'm here is an integration of two things you've possibly seen, some of you, over the last few weeks. And there's a lot there, but maybe if I unpack it from a personal point of view, what I'm really interested in, maybe people in the past have been on a training program or a learning program, or you've read something and it has affected you in some way. It's shifted, you think, your mindset. And you make great plans and commitments to do something in your life about that. And maybe it's a sort of Friday afternoon, you're then heading to the weekend. But by the time you put those plans into place the following week, you by mid-afternoon Tuesday, they are just a sort of a bit of a fading memory, because things of other stuff has happened in life and has got in the way. That's what really interests me. That's what really interests me from the point of view of formal learning. What we do in the classroom, and particularly the type of formal learning I do, which is inside organizations. How does that, how do we move beyond people losing their commitments in the action, traction, and distraction of everyday life? And particularly within the context of a global energy firm. For the last 25 years of my life, energy transition has been my main interest. And back to something we talked about, impacting human history, I guess I made a conscious choice in terms of how I organize what I do to try and sort of put myself in the forefront of that within a global energy firm. And I'll say a little bit about that role. And that has given me, I think, something of a ringside seat. When we start to think about transition, we think a lot about consumer behaviors. We don't think a lot about producer behaviors, and particularly the notion of the producer mindset. So I'd like to spend some time over the next 15 minutes. For those of you that know Myers-Briggs and the likes, I'm a J in Myers-Briggs terms, so I'll do my best to hit sort of 15 minutes in terms of what I do. And I'll say a little bit of something to start off a bit. Paulius was good enough to give an introduction. Let me say a little bit more, because the nature of the type of academic I am has an impact in terms of the type of work that I do. So let me say how that frames what I do. Let me then step back a bit in terms of the nature of the work that I've done that I want to build upon here at the IAS, and say specifically what that looks like. And I'll say what's on my mind as I'm here now about some of the things that I'd like to do to try and develop, and also then open up for some discussions and questions afterwards. I'm Irish. I'm married. I've got 3 grown-up children, but I've been based in London for the last 40 years. I'm as Paulius was saying, I'm based primarily at the London School of Economics. This is my second career. For my sins, the first 15 years of my life was spent as in frontline financial services, which is a way of saying that I was a US government bond trader. And I also ran JP Morgan's fixed income derivative structuring business in Northern Europe. And then I was a frustrated sociologist of the past, and I decided I didn't want to die an investment banker in my mid-30s. And a wife who's a social worker who said that she would never basically I could continue doing what I'm doing as long as she never had to meet any of the people that I worked with. So I decided to go back to college. I went back to the LSE in 1998 and did an MSc in organizational social psychology. That was followed around 20 years later by my doctorate at Cambridge. I'm a pracademic. Now that's a horrible term, I know, but that basically means that I spend my time between teaching, and I have a full load for what I do at the LSE. I run a course called Organizational Life, which I've done for the last 22 years, along with supervision and mentoring and the like. But I spend most of my time inside organizations where most of what I do is I design and deliver customized executive education, okay? I teach inside organizations. So when people say that they deal with organizations, sometimes they're advisors or they give advice. I don't. I actually teach inside organizations in inverted commas. My interests are, I guess, threefold. One, and the primary one, is in contextualized learning, and particularly this idea of translating between the academy and the beauty of the ideas we have in the academy and organizational practice. I tend to do that in circumstances of transformational change. And my understanding of change is not one where you flick the switch, but one that is more process-orientated, involving a liminal period where we're involved in a transition. I'm particularly interested in the impact of time, not just linear time. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but also sort of non-linear time. Those things that we talked about a little bit a few moments ago, the likes of that don't get captured within the normal way of visualizing time at the moment. So possibly it's not surprising that I naturally orientate towards a more mediating position in terms of what I do. I tend to see the human agent, the active human agent, as being a part of their experience context. I cannot see either of those as being sort of separated from one another. But I'm driven on a day-to-day basis by the dual consideration of both understanding and of use. And I have for right or wrong, a prioritization of engagement as a consequence, as a part of that. So I quite like the idea of stepping into the lion's den to see to what extent we can translate our ideas in environments that wouldn't normally be susceptible to them. So I guess I am and my label changes in terms of how I see it. I'm an applied critical constructivist with a very strong pragmatist leaning. So how's that relevant to what I want to do here? Cast your mind back to 2007. And I had a 7-minute meeting with the chief executive of a European international oil company. And it was at the behest of Duke Corporate Education, who I worked with in those days, who were the leading provider of this field. And something really struck me in that meeting, because it was the end of a series of meetings where I'd been brought into this institution to try and think about how we would get our heads around the idea of bringing about mindset change in terms of their preparation for transition and for energy transition. And I wrote down as I came out of that meeting what the chief executive said. This company said will be very different in the future. He said, if it has a future. We need a fundamental mindset change in how we shape the types of deals we do. So if you think these are lots of institutions that have a very linear approach to what they've done over the years, oil and gas has been a sort of relatively easy business to do for them. They haven't had to expose themselves to the outside world. They have to deal with society in a very, very different way, in a way that they're really not constructed to think about. And we need to find a way, and his words, of moving the needle in how we act differently. And the response to this was a very revolutionary approach to try and do it. These were very intellectual types of people. These were mid-career deal makers that were very stuck in their ways. You think to yourself, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So we basically did a very drama-based, experiential and sense-making approach as a form of program learning with this group that aimed to challenge their assumptions and their orthodoxies, to broaden their understanding of value, and to build and maintain more purposeful relationships and to reach out in a different type of way that they would have done in the past. That did quite well, okay? And for those that I worked with, they said, well, that's fine, you know, sort of, let's just be happy enough with that because it looks as if from all the ratings that we're doing very well as it did after a year or so. But I wasn't comfortable with that. And I wasn't comfortable with it because I wasn't in any way convinced that what we were doing in the classroom was having any meaningful impact out in the outside world, that people still were in their ivory tower, and it wasn't impacting what people actually did. And the complexity of this was at various types of levels. One, you know, there are huge identity challenges for the people involved, both at an individual, a company, at an industry, at a societal level, but there were also knowledge challenges. These were people in mid-career in a lot of cases who already had a set way of knowing and a set way of doing. So there was a lot of unlearning and unknowing that needed to be done. And we weren't aiming at the idea of just equipping them with skills. We were aiming for what is called, you know, double loop learning, this idea of shifting the frame that people have. And of course, then, you know, I use a term with people all the time in terms of what I do, is that I can see them working with me for a week, and then I can see them walking out of the room and then actively forgetting every single thing we've talked about as they get pulled back into the worlds that they're very familiar with. This became a very big issue for us because I threatened to walk away from this in 2009 unless we really addressed what they do in the workplace as opposed to what they do in the classroom. And that led to the company signing off on a parallel process of unfunded research in 2008, which has been the basis of a lot of what I've done for the last 16 years. It also became a bone of contention with myself and Duke. Duke left the project and it was left to me and this group to pull this together over the remaining years. And that approach is, and it's the end of that period, and I'll say in a moment as to sort of why that is relevant, that I want to focus on when I'm here at the IAS. I started an action learning process that lasted, as I said, for 16 years, a case study in what happens after people leave the room, after they go back to the workplace. My hunch was that the different contexts of learning and activity promote different degrees of what I call active forgetting, okay? My focus, as I said, is on the type of learning that impacts the frame as opposed to skills. And from a theoretical perspective, I'm interested in the different context, and particularly the methods of recontextualization and the impact that when they go back into these worlds that time has, not just time like overtime and linear time, but the types of things we don't think about, non-linear aspects of time. I was very much a semi-insider over these years. As you'll see in a moment, this became really a part of my life. And I wore two hats simultaneously. One is the lead faculty for the program, and the other as the sole researcher. And that involved, as is the nature of action research, multiple ongoing cycles over this period of formal and informal action, but also reflection. Reflection being absolutely central to this because it was crucial to me to maintain, in some sense, my sense of objectivity and independence. The research had four, I guess, overlapping phases. The first was a period where I thought to myself, I cannot be the first person who has come across this as an issue. So I decided to literally do, in the best traditions, a full literature review or literatures review. And particularly noted the fact that a lot of learning theory is very individualistic focus. It's very linear, and even the main element of theory in this area, the transfer of training literature, which is a tradition of 120 years. Basically, we know after 120 years, not a lot. Okay, and it's very interesting here that in the time that I've been doing this, the three major academics in this field have really thrown in the intellectual towel here and said, well, do you know what? We don't think it's not about learning. It's more about actually what happens afterwards, and it's about context, which was something of a validation for the direction of this research. The second phase was observation. I started to observe a lot because, and I did the count there recently, between 2009 and 2018, I literally spent 355 days of my life, 24 hours a day at this organization. This organization has a hotel in its headquarters. So I was literally eating, sleeping, and drinking with these people on a daily basis. I was taking notes and observational notes as well. So, as a form of ethnography, this became sort of the core of a lot of what fed into what was then the formal research that took over this. When we started to sort of get some momentum behind this, the organization really wanted some rigor behind it. So I turned it into a doctorate between 2013 and 19. As I said, I had over 5,000 notes behind me. And at that stage, 152 interviews in order to sort of bring together this idea that I had that the practice setting that people go back to needed in some way to be visualized, and needed to be visualized from a temporal point of view. Needed people to understand what are those types of things that are impacting them. So a little bit like what Yitzhak was saying a few moments ago, that barrage of social media, it doesn't get captured in normal linear clock time. So could there be a way of actually reflecting it in the way that they think of time themselves, which is their calendar on the computer? And then over the last 3 years, I have tested and implemented that approach, that methodology in the action program that we do. And that's involved, as I said, here 12 elite demonstrations, 152 one-to-ones, and 64 group sessions. I have a wealth, an absolute wealth of data. This is where I want to focus on my time here at the Institute. This is the bit that is undocumented. This is the bit where I'm stepping back and want to reflect and think about this. And I'll say a little bit more in just 2 moments as to kind of how it breaks down in terms of why I think it's of interest. This was my research design. As it looks, you really don't have to pay much attention to this, because in practice, that's the kind of how it came to be. It was anyone who's worked in any shape or form on an ongoing basis inside organizations trying to get work done, research done, is itself can be quite chaotic. But my findings very much verified, I think, some of the skepticism, and has been something I've seen constantly over 25 years in this industry, which is that you can get people to know stuff in the room, they can understand it, it can register with them, they can be happy with it, they can even say that they've learned. They can fill out their sheets at the end of the week and say it's really good. But actually, by the time they go back into their old environments, something really, really happens to that, okay? And the post-program period, I found, was defined by meetings, was riven by interruptions, and was experienced in a very fast and forward way, okay? And that meant that in a lot of cases, when people went back into those environments, those post-program temporal practices, how they had their meetings, those interruptions, that experience that they felt, pull them back in a lot of cases to their pre-programmed behaviors and identities, and had a significant impact on their commitment to practice new behaviors. That's a really, really worrying thing, because in the end, this is what I found, is that if you look, at the end of a learning program, usually you ask people to fill out some sort of evaluation form, and you'd ask them to rate and to rank kind of how satisfied they are, but also in a lot of cases, how committed they are to practicing what it is they wanted to do. And this program was a very successful program. It was loved by the people who were on it. There was very high satisfaction, very high commitment to practice. But just look at that initial period. Within 23 days, that commitment to practice came down from just under 5, 4.7 to 2.96, okay. Thereafter, the quality of my data is not very good because you lose contact with people, okay? They fall off the radar screen. You don't know where they are. In a lot of cases, I think you can make the assumption that actually, they've gone on to think and do other things. This is very similar to, I guess, people might know Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, but this was my attempt at showing an inactivity curve associated with something that people actually said they wanted to do and were committed to. I also spent, I did my doctorate at Cambridge and split my time between the Faculty of Education and the Department of Computer Science, and worked with Professor Alan Blackwell there. And I developed, I'm a quant by background. I developed a way of visualizing different aspects of time to be able to use with people, to try and give them a sense of the world that they're coming back into. And this is like the diary. This is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the weekend. And this is from 9 to 5. And these blocks here are the meetings that people are in. And I tried to capture not just temporal density, either the meetings people are in, but also those other things like interruptions. So back to what Yitzhak was talking about a few moments ago about the barrage of social media. These dots are just I would ask people, how many emails do you receive in a day? How many emails do you send? How many connections would you make in an hour? Okay, how many times would you check your devices? And you can see these various dots are the representations of the types of interruptions that they got through the day, okay? This was just a way of trying to think of that impact of time and seeing if there was a way, could we visualize that, and could it be used in some way to actually sort of help people carve out space for practicing what it is they say is important to themselves. So what changed? This was quite successful. We constantly brought it back into the design of the program. This was a program that was based around, it was a 5-day program initially, based around very visceral, as I said, experiences, the use of drama, of penetrating at an emotional level. It used a lot of translation devices in terms of sort of trying to bridge that gap between theory and practice, academia and the real world, and was based around the idea of individual sense-making. There was a lot of license. It was believed to be a safe environment that people were able to work with an understanding of how they thought about it themselves. One of the changes that we brought about was the idea of providing multiple levels of scaffolding to people, okay, in terms of not just making sense themselves, but particularly external coaching and mentoring so that people could start to figure out, well, what does this mean for me and my type of environment? But also the recognition of the impact of time on the learning process. And you'll see that the format changed over time, okay? We started out as a 2-day program, went to a 5-day program, into a 4-day program. It is now a 10-week process, trying to really give space for people to establish and have scaffold new opportunities to practice new behaviors in terms of what they do. If you think about what we're looking at here, this is an international oil company and a group of people who have been brought up in a fossil fuel business that, as I said, is very linear. They know what they're doing. This is a very, very different business involved in energy transition, where they're involved with whole new stakeholders, new technologies, and have a very different connection with society. And it's the type of thing that if you just think you can revolutionize it overnight by flicking a switch, you really don't get very far. The impact has been quite significant. This is now the flagship program for this company. I've done 78 of these programs over the years with over 1,800 participants. The nice thing about it is there's a strong cross-general reach within this. There are 3 generations in a lot of cases of people that have actually been through the program. They have a common language, they have a common way of thinking about this. In terms of the scores on these things, it went from 4.7 up to around 4.75, but now we do this virtually as opposed to face-to-face. There's a common metric within this part of the world that adds sort of 0.35 to that actually has us going above 5 on the ranking, okay? But the most interesting thing is that the engagement levels over these 10 weeks is running at 85%. And the company has separately, independently audited this in terms of actual activity, in terms of getting things done. And have found that in 2022 alone, in terms of the new business that they're trying to do, in very, very different business, okay, they found that they had 190 times return on investment. But in January 2004, I announced that I was stepping away from this program. I guess in a lot of cases, I thought to myself, I've got as far as I can go in terms of thinking about this. But I guess I've become increasingly worried and disillusioned about the speed and the momentum of the energy transition. And I was, from a deeper point of view, sort of particularly with the refocus on hydrocarbons, a lot of what I have developed, I didn't want it to be used and applied in ways that I didn't think was relevant in terms of the, and particularly pressing in terms of the future of the world. I don't know if you notice or keeping, you know, obviously the world continues to significantly warm. You can pick whatever level you like from Copernicus, but you can also see at the moment that, you know, we are producing fossil fuels at a rate never seen before in human history. The international oil companies are making more profits from that. They're becoming increasingly emboldened in terms of how they deal with those that are not similarly minded to themselves. And actually the renewables business is in a real difficulty, okay, in terms of the numbers. The numbers just don't work for renewables at the moment. And that really worries me. So that gave me, I suppose, an opportunity to step back, and particularly thinking, you know, that we may face a situation over the coming months where Donald Trump can say that at the end of the Iowa caucus, you know, he's going to do two things on his first day, which he's going to end illegal migration and he's going to drill, baby, drill. And that plays to something that quite concerns me at the moment about the momentum of transition. And I'll come to an end by just saying how this comes together in terms of what I want to do here. I want to focus in terms of the 16 years experience on the final operationalization and implementation of what I did in this research between 2021 and 24. Because I think that will give me an opportunity to focus on two very connected issues. One is that I did a very rigorous academic piece of work in terms of that visualization model, in terms of how I thought we could change the nature of the program to have a bigger impact in terms of what people do, how we can start to mitigate the impacts of their context, okay? But actually, by the time I came to apply that, the impact of practice had a significant impact on the shape of that approach, particularly in terms of the tool, the methodology, the processes of liminality over that period, especially in relation to time recontextualization and how we connected with the flow of work. And particularly also, as I look back, and if I'm honest with myself, the level of understanding, the level of analysis that we employed, I tended to, despite referring to myself as a sociologically informed social psychologist, the power and the reductionist power of being pulled to the individual is so strong. And I suspect that is not something that was particularly useful in terms of more lasting change. I'm also aware of the impact of the wider context of that. My life changed the day Putin invaded Ukraine because a whole new dimension was offered into the logic behind fossil fuels, which was, of course, energy security. And that ties into what I think is brings me back to the thing that is the core of a lot of my research, which is around this idea of mindset and framing, okay? And particularly the idea that there's an increasing representation of the energy transition and renewables as woke, not just as at a, you know, at an ideological and a societal level. And that is having significant blowback, I think, into the industry itself, and is one of the reasons that I thought it was time to step back and to think more broadly about what I have known, what I have understood, and what I have done, and how it might be used in a more broader way to try and achieve a more greater impetus and greater equity and greater speed in terms of how we bring about transition. And that's what I want to do when I'm here. What's on my mind is staying focused to those two things in terms of the scope of my activity. And at the same time, I also would like to think about the format of my output. I want to produce something like colleagues that is rigorous and publishable here and usable from an IS point of view, but I'm also conscious of the fact that I have got very different audiences as a academic than maybe pure mainstream academia. And I'd like to look at ways of trying to reach those audiences. So I've had conversations with Claire and Lisette initially over the first few days about how we might think of doing that alongside what I want to produce. But most of all, like, it's been amazing here this afternoon, just listening to colleagues in very different situations and circumstances, how connections form. And as I said, I've had a wonderful opportunity over the last few days to do that. And please, I would say to colleagues, if there's anything in any shape or form that connects, please reach out. And I look forward to be able to make those connections and those interactions and build on those connections over the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Sally.
Thank you, Sadi. Sadi, I can't hear you.
We can't hear you, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Can hear you now, Sadi, yeah.
Yeah, so apologies for asking again a question, but Barry, you provoked me. You know, I worked for 15 years in an energy industry, as you perhaps know, and we worked on things a bit similar. And you know, your slide where you described the 23 days and the fall in the impact on practice. This is actually not certainly not a failure of what you did. This is actually the success of the company whose work is precisely having installations, channeling people in doing the same instead of changing, because that's the role of an organization. Mm-hmm. And so you've been working in a fabulously efficient organization, and it manages to, keep away what you were trying to do is making these people change. And I think that what you have done in changing the way you're doing it, instead of like one big push, getting into something longer, is certainly the way to do. I mean, the way to do is use the same kind of very powerful tools of keep channeling people and to keep them on the same track. And this is why your stuff is so efficient. And so I don't think it's desperate. It's just that we should not fight against organizations. We should use the very systems they have into channeling their own personnel to do in the right way. So what you're showing is that things are possible. And my own experience at because it was EDF is that, these big boats can actually change, but it takes an enormous amount of time. But then they're so powerful that when they do, they actually have an impact. And so it's people like you to make these big boats change direction.
Thank you, Sadi. And Sadi, I compliment Tony Giddens and Jürgen Habermas, but your installation theory, and in fact, you'll be glad to know that in my supervision students are coming back to me and showing me installation theory and actually I think the comment you make in terms of sort of the nature of what it has and what it does very efficiently in terms of behavior is a very nice way of thinking about this, okay? But it's interesting, Sadi. Sometimes we get tired, sort of, and I think at the moment it's this has been my life's work and my life's purpose. I don't want to be tired and angry. I want to be tired and positive. And this is why this fellowship has come at a very interesting time, because I need some space to think about how a lot of what I've done and where I think some of those more positive strains have come from can actually be built upon, and actually to have conversations like the likes we've just had now, to sort of that points in ways of giving added momentum.
Norbert Alter wrote a very nice paper called La lassitude de l'acteur de l'innovation, the tiredness of the actor of innovation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? All right. If not, I would also encourage you to keep in touch during this month. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to the audience as well.